So 12 months on, what has the Jubilee government done? All through this week, we shall be taking stock of the Jubilee scorecard. That's what we're calling it, just what the Jubilee government has done in the various sectors.
That's right. Edith Kimani is here to give us a snapshot. What does the Jubilee scorecard look like at this moment?
Well, let's not waste any time. You know, I'm here to give you facts and figures. But before we get to the facts and figures, let's talk about what the Jubilee government promised. There were many promises, including a raft of things that were to be done in the first 100 days. But I don't think anything expresses it quite so clearly as a quote we're about to see by President Uhuru Kenyatta during one of his campaign days. And he said that the promise of the Jubilee government was to take measures to make Kenya a fairer, healthier and better educated country. That's the vision for the Jubilee government. Whether or not it's achieving this is a question that you will have to answer at the end of this presentation. But what do Kenyans think? That's the promise. Let's look at the worry. Today, Ipsos Synovate released a poll which showed what Kenyans are most concerned about when it comes to the Jubilee government. High cost of living, 50% of the respondents saying that is what they're concerned about. Lack of employment, 19%. Corruption, crime and insecurity coming in third and fourth at 9% and 7% respectively. What we will notice, however, is that these two have to do with the same thing, the state of the economy. Kenyans are worried about whether they're making enough money, whether they're able to buy their food, educate their children, and so that's where we're going to start. The state of the economy as is right now. And what we're going to show you is a section of figures that best explain where Kenya is at right now. And I want you to think of this as your household. How you would do your budget at home, think of the national budget or the national figures as that. The wage bill, this is what we're spending to pay civil servants, to pay our members of parliament, to run government, 458 billion shillings. On its own, it looks like a figure that you would find in any national budget, except it's 53%. That's more than half of our national budget. And on top of this, we do have members of parliament as early as perhaps a few days ago saying that they want 5 billion more for car loans and mortgages. So that's where we're at in terms of paying bills. We haven't even done anything else. Our current debt. How much do we owe? 1.8 trillion shillings. And if you think this is any bad, Treasury is saying that by June of next year, that figure is going to have skyrocketed to 2.2 trillion shillings. And that is compared to a national budget, that's the current budget for the year ending June this year, which stands at 1.6 trillion shillings. Our GDP, this is basically how much the country is worth. Estimated at 3.4 trillion shillings. Now, these figures are from the Kenya Bureau of Statistics from 2012. We still don't have any updated figures. The growth rate, unfortunately, very sluggish economy, moving at only 5.2%. These are conservative estimates. We do have figures going as low as 4.7% and some as high as 5.8%. Our inflation rate, basically, in terms of shilling for product, how much are we spending? 6.86% inflation rate in the month of February. This is pretty good compared to January, where we had 7.2%. I just want us to go back to those figures so I can explain exactly what it means. Please take me back to the first words just so that I can explain what it means. It means that the country is worth 3.4 trillion shillings. We're growing very minimally at about 5.2%. And yet, going back to the first board, we are spending a whopping 1.6 trillion shillings a year, but we have a debt burden that surpasses this here, the debt burden surpassing our current budget. Obviously, these are figures that anyone would be worried about, and given that that figure is projected to go up by 2.2 trillion at the same exact time next year. So what does this mean for government a year on? So we continue to where we were. This means that government is trying everything in its power to bring these numbers down, to make sure that they make sense. And one of the things that Jubilee said when it came into power was that it was going to cut government spending. Some of the austerity measures that have been put in place restrict foreign travel. Cabinet secretaries and parastatal heads now have to justify foreign travel, also how much they need and how many days they need to go for. Thin the workforce. It says think workforce, but it really should be thin the workforce. What this means in reality is slash the number of jobs that are there in the civil service. It's not a popular thing, it's not a popular move, but it's something that the government says needs to be done. And part of this is because of the ghost workers that President Uhuru Kenyatta was talking about. The figure he gave recently was that the government was spending 150 million shillings to pay either dead workers, workers who are non-existent, retired workers, or workers who are simply been sacked. And that figure was coming to 1.8 million shillings. And so he's also collapsing parastatals to make sure that those whose work sort of overlap with each other come into one. This here is going to create a lot of controversy given that it's a catch-22. The Uhuru Ruto government did promise to create jobs. So while they're slashing jobs, to make sure that the numbers make sense, they also need to create them. Widen the tax bracket. I think we've all felt it. VAT, the imposable 16% VAT on most products, which means that our rate of, our cost of living is going up, and an insurance, which the government is basically doing, is basically taking an insurance policy from the IMF to make sure that we cushion ourselves from global economic shock. So that's what's happening in terms of the economy. In terms of security, which is the second thing that Kenyans said was a priority for them, here's a figure that you want to know. Kenya is ranked number 16 as one of the most, number 16th as the most dangerous country in the world. This is by Positive Press Agency. They say that our entanglement with Somalia, that coupled with the fact that we have the largest, we host the largest refugee camp in the world, creates for insecure places. Insecurity is particularly rife in Nairobi, Mombasa, and northeastern region. Just some particular examples coming in from Wajir, Garissa, and Mandera. Bungoma, you'll remember, just a few days after President Uhuru Kenyatta took office on 10th of March 2013, 10 people died from those attacks. Mandera, up to 15 people killed in inter-clan wars. Wajir and Garissa, who have experienced a raft of explosives and attacks even in police stations. And Nairobi, of course, we'll remember Westgate happening in September of 2013. These are the most affected regions when it comes to insecurity. What did government promise? President Uhuru Kenyatta said he was going to have CCTV technology employed across the country to ensure we were under surveillance. Government funded life insurance for military personnel and police officers to make sure that their households and their families were well taken care of even after they departed. New border security forces for our vast and porous borders. Remember who our neighbors are, Somalia and South Sudan, who unfortunately are also ranked as some of the most insecure countries in the world. Police-citizen ratio to be increased from 1 of every 1150 to 1 out of 800 citizens. This basically means that for every 1,150 people in Kenya, there is only one police officer. That ought to be changed to this figure. Recruit 15,000 police officers annually this year. We still haven't seen that. Provide modern security equipment. One of the major concerns was that there weren't enough vehicles, so they were to have 2 vehicles in every ward. That hasn't happened. Those are the issues internally. Externally, we have to see the map of Somalia to understand, first of all, how it affects us. I'm not sure if it's too clear on your screens, but basically what Kenya sought to do was get into Somalia from the south, move the Al-Shabaab all the way up, and make sure that they have reclaimed Kismayo, which is this point here, and ensure that they have taken away their charcoal industry, which was bringing them a lot of money, and they've managed to do that. So the areas which you're seeing in a pale sort of orange peach, those are the areas where government allied troops are, the Somali government allied troops, also in the auspices of AMISOM. The places that are in bright orange are the places where recent allied advances have taken place, and the places which are in orange, obviously a long way to go, still held by the Al-Shabaab. When it comes to these, what are some of the successes that Kenya has had? Well, to be honest, they're still standing. There are a lot of places where military action has been taken, and once the military has left, then the places fall back into the militants. That hasn't happened. Kismayo, for example, is doing quite well, and they have their own administration now, run by a Somali citizen. And as recently as, I think it was June of this year, they said that January this year, they said that 30 militants had been killed by KDF forces who were doing an aerial bombardment. So there are the achievements. We have the failures as well. So you decide how far the government has gone in terms of the things that you find most critical.
Well, thank you, Edith. That was a really comprehensive look. And just looking at what you've told us, do you think that Deputy President's assessment of the situation as so far so good actually mirrors what you've just told us?
Well, it depends who's looking at it, because like we saw yesterday, there are always good numbers and there are always negative numbers. If you look at what we were talking about insecurity, they might give you figures of what we call Operation Nyumba Kumi. That's taking place, but does it have structures, and are they outside of Nairobi? It depends what side of the mirror you're looking at.
A very political answer.
Very political
Thank you.
answer.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.